give me something to believe in along the way.
We're rolling. First episode of the Fairly Interesting Podcast. I'm Jack Winders. This is my big brother, Dr. Tommy Winders, or our dad, Max Winders. And we're going to give this a shot. We don't exactly know where it's going to go or when it's going to go, but we're going to try to tackle a few things, mostly surrounding the area of agriculture, which these two have a lot more experience than I do, but I can chip in some thoughts and questions along the way. But why don't we just briefly introduce yourselves. We can start with you, Tommy.
Yeah, sure. Tommy Winders. I am trained as beef nutritionist and working in the animal feed sort of industry right now, focusing on ruminants. But I think, Jack, I can speak for both of us. We have a natural interest in this stemming from our dad, from years of these sort of discussions like we want to have from a whole world point of view, and the overall goodness of agriculture is something we've been kind of brought up with. And so this is a pretty cool opportunity for us to take the next step and actually record something, and let's hope it's fairly interesting.
At least.
Yeah.
How about you, Dad?
Yeah, thanks, Jack and Tommy. 30 years working in international agriculture, plus or minus, and seeing the inherent goodness of feeding people around the world, from the poorest to the affluent, and what an amazing accomplishment that the farmers in the industry of the world are doing, that's largely sort of overlooked, taken for granted, but is ephemeral, like it's actually very fragile and precarious, and so the idea to bring us together and chat about it, and try and highlight the significance and the necessity of it, and the opportunity I think is going to be something, well, I hope will be fairly interesting, to people who would like to learn more. It's such a complex issue, feeding the world, and agriculture is very complex and sophisticated, far beyond what most people could ever imagine, and there's a lot to it, and one of the reasons for us agreeing to do this, and I'm really excited about it, is to be able to take the time to sort of pull it apart and explain it to people. It's not just one thing. It's not just one soundbite. There's a lot here to unpack, and I think, with better understanding, will allow for people to make better decisions, and for them to have better conversations, and hopefully to advocate for people first, humanity first, and the importance of liberating agriculture to feed the billions of people. And a fairly interesting podcast. I love it. It's sort of understated. We're not promising too much, which is good. Maybe it'll be interesting, maybe it won't. And but there's
I think to piggyback off that, if nothing else comes from it, we all reap the rewards of agriculture every day, and it's it is the unsung hero, and so there's so many goodness stories that come from it, and they never see the light of day, it doesn't seem like. And so that's exciting for me, at least, is we're taking the time to shed light on things that we know to be good and true, but maybe we can teach others along the way some of the things that we've picked up and really appreciate about the industry, and how it does serve a purpose for the betterment of humanity. And so I think unpacking some of that is going to be a fun and slightly challenging but exciting task for us ahead.
Yeah, for sure. In general, what, when you say you want to talk about and shed some light upon agriculture, and, the goodness of it, what specifically, is the goal in a really, if you had 30 seconds in an elevator and you're telling somebody you're starting a podcast, what are we going to be talking about for the listeners that hopefully made it this far and wondering if they, should stick around?
Do you want to tackle that? Or do you want me to start?
Yeah, I think that there would be two things. One is the magnitude of the task ahead of us. We have 7.6 billion people today, and there's going to be, by 2050, there'll be somewhere around 9.6 billion. So 2 billion more people coming in our lifetime, certainly in your lifetime. And what are we going to do about it, right? So this is the ominous task before us now. And so it's challenging and daunting, but I would like this podcast to shed great optimism, rational optimism, as Matt Ridley would put it, because there is every reason to be optimistic about our ability to do this, and not only just do it, but do it like in terms of abundance. And that's one of the things a new vernacular we'd like to introduce is abundance agriculture, to put a positive sort of confident spin on the role of agriculture in the next let's say 20, 30 years. Because after you get to 2050, then the world population will probably start to flatten off, and if trends continue, projections are that by 2100 it'll be peaked out and it'll be decreasing. So in some respects, the big pinnacle of the apex of the challenge is in our lifetimes. And we need to rise to it, and we can. So,
and for me, I think that's basically the primary goal. But a secondary one would be if we can straighten out some of the misconceptions and commonly talked about things that are, for example, a lot of the environmental concerns and things along those lines that get a lot of attention, but maybe aren't talked about in exactly the right manner. I think if we could take some time to address some of the misconceptions and hopefully give a different spin on it, because there is incredible progress that has been made that's directly correlated to also environmental progress too along the way. And so I think that's a goal of this for me personally too, would be to at least shed some light on the incredible progress of the last really 60 years has been a really big steep improvement in general agriculture.
Yeah, not many people would know that, in that same period of time, 60 years, we've increased, yields of cereals and crops by 400 to 500%, 4 or 5x, sometimes 6x. We've doubled production of beef in the last 30 years. We've doubled milk production, cattle in the last 25 years, and we're weaning 30 piglets per sow per year. And 20 years ago, if you could push out 10 a year, you were doing good. So, and then chickens, broilers, we can grow them now in 34 days, 36 days. I mean, versus what used to be when I was a kid, take 80 days. So, we're making such great strides in terms of productivity and efficiency, but people wouldn't know this,
Well, and they won't know it, and I guess answer my own question, for me, that growing up around ag and is a common conversation of my life growing up and still, today. It's the easy punching bag for people in the society, and it's the in many ways an unfair punching bag that takes so much, whether it's environment or whether it's health or it's what you name it. It's always ag and specifically animal agriculture, and so one of the things that I think that we all want to do with this is we've sat around and you've always said, well, you got to fight back, you got to push back and tell the story, and stories are so powerful, and right now abundance ag is not telling a good story. And so rather than saying we got to start telling a good story, I think this is 8 minutes into trying to figure out how to tell a good story about legitimate ag, production ag. Not there's anything wrong with raising a few cattle on the back 40, but that's not going to feed the world, and that's not what gets vilified. So bringing some positive to the the production side of ag that actually feeds the world.
That's exactly right. It's really well put, and it's something that we've been hearing for a while, is that this industry, it's a prideful bunch and it's a quiet bunch. They like to, just get to work and not really talk about it too much. But there's been people that have been reaching out, wanting there to be more voices, and so I'm one of those that would like there to be more voices. I know Max, you're one of those that would like to be more voices in the industry, and same with you, Jack. And so I think that's another reason why we're doing this, is because, okay, why not us then? We should at least do our part to try to spread some good messages that we think are very true.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, it's I think that the ag industry is, and farmers in particular are, like you said, Tommy, they get her done type people. They don't complain. They just work harder, dig deeper, and shut up. And they sort of have a disdain for whiners and they sort of keep to themselves, and are fairly quiet. And so this is not helpful in a world that needs, a lot of communication. In the U.S., less than 2% of our population's involved in farming. And so, the touch points of almost everyone with modern, intensive, abundance agriculture, farming techniques is zero. They have no contact, no context. And so, nature abhors a vacuum. And so when you have an empty space, that gets filled by narratives. And it so happens that a lot of the anti-abundance ag people, advocates in the world, are great communicators. So, there's a great mismatch. We have really hard-working people that produce, so much of the food to nourish humanity, and do it on a big scale, and are super efficient and responsible and caring, and they just are terrible communicators. Then you have a bunch of people that are living in the basement eating Doritos, 6 bags a day or whatever, and they're awesome communicators, and they're maybe winning the communication war, and this is the war for ideas. There's Gad Sad, the professor in Canada, wrote The Parasitic Mind, but these mind parasites are dangerous. They can take hold. And
ideas and definitions.
Ideas and definitions, yeah. And Richard Dawkins, famously coined the phrase or the concept of memes. So we have these memes around modern intensive agriculture that are, to your point, Tommy, are dangerous.
What do you mean by memes?
Memes are ideas that capture people's imagination and become instantiated in society.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not like an internet meme, like a funny meme.
No,
Okay.
right. Actually,
it's probably named after.
Right, they named after. It's a derivative of it. Right.
Capture a sentiment.
Yeah, that's right. They capture a sentiment. So, but memes are, in general, are ideas that catch on, that are sticky. Yeah, sticky ideas. And one of them in agriculture is that big ag is bad. Corporate ag is bad, unhealthy. Use of chemistry in ag is bad and unhealthy. The use of genetic engineering in ag is unnatural and unhealthy. The use of nitrogen and fertilizers, synthetics, in agriculture is bad and unhealthy. These are all very sticky memes that are not only wrong but are dangerous.
Well, they're dangerous because if I think to not assume what you're thinking, but I think I'm following with you that, you might be asking, okay, if the farmers are, nose to the grindstone, why do they care what's being talked about? They don't want in the conversation anyway. The danger is that these memes, as you're saying, or these narratives are what eventually shape policy.
Yeah,
and
right.
when policy is when all of a sudden things, look at the Dutch farm crisis. That's these memes put into policy, and like, and then once that happens, that's a whole different thing than just talking and wishing for certain things in agriculture. Is that fair to say? Like
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think to kind of ask a question based off that, in your opinion, how do these things get started? Does it stem from 2% of people only being tied to it? So there's just the familiarity with how things have been done and how things are done is so, there's degrees of removal now of generations of past without anyone being on, growing up in that environment. Is that how these misconceptions and narratives get lost? Is it because the lack of connection to it, or what's your take on that?
Wow, that we should do a podcast on that, because that's big.
Mm-hmm.
Big part of it is storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
There's a romanticization, a romantic aspect to the way Grandpa used to farm. There's even today, there's ag tourism in Africa. So, and what that tourism's big business. So, Europeans from Switzerland or wealthy Brits or from Dutch or Germans, you go to Africa and then you go to somewhere like in the Congo or Ghana, and then you get to photograph all the women carrying water on their heads, walking 20 miles a day back and forth, and a hand, catering to a crop, picking pests off or fruit or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable, the power of this. Those poor people, stuck with such a miserable way of producing food, so onerous and fatiguing, and numbing, physically, mentally numbing, and even in America and in the modern world, there's a romanticization of the old way of farming. So that's part of it, and so those stories are powerful. The other part of it is, I think, the nature of, as we mentioned, with farmers that are involved in really high consequence, significant farming. They're highly conscientious in their nature, but probably low in openness. So they're more introverted than extroverted.
Mm-hmm.
And so and maybe they're, I also think part of their character in general is averse to confrontation. They don't want to have an argument. They just want to get on and do what they want,
Mm-hmm.
but not get into a verbal or any sort of an argument about what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so I think those things, and then the people that are pushing against the use of technology and techniques in modern agriculture are highly motivated by a deep meaning they're getting from this belief system they have of virtuous saving people from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's mixed in with it's a seven-headed hydra. It's mixed in with a worship of nature, a belief that the environment is pure and man is a despoiler of nature, somehow outside of nature, that man introduces harm,
Mm-hmm.
to nature.
A bit that's perplexing too is that agriculture is liberating and it frees up people's time. And with that time that people now have because of how efficient agriculture is, they've decided, a certain proportion of them have decided to demonize the thing that gave them that time to think
Right.
like that. So it's confusing, and I wonder if it is stems from the disconnect of less and less people being tied to it or not. But it's a little bit it's an interesting thing that's happening and has been happening.
Well, and it's the ones that are the most vocal about the whatever, we'll use GMOs as the issue of the day, but replace that with whatever the complaint or the thing they're going to point out and say is dangerous and unhealthy and a danger to the environment. Those people that are throwing these accusations and concerns up are probably the least likely to actually suffer from, again, to go back to policy, saying that, okay, we're going to ban the use of these technologies. They're not going to be harmed by it. They're always going to, it's not the poor of the world that are complaining about GMOs. It's those that can afford food, even if it goes up in price, that are the ones pushing against it. And meanwhile, the ones that need it the very, very most are going to be robbed of that technology, safe technology, and suffer the consequences. Without.
That's exactly right.
So I really think that, and to your point, there's some sort of meaning, and I think that many of them truly believe that they're doing good. They're not. This probably doesn't go for it. Nothing goes for everybody. Many of them don't see it as that they're bringing harm to the poor of the world. They see it that they're really protecting nature, or removing harmful toxins and frankenfoods from the food supply, which is all just slanderous terms and buzzwords. But at the end of the day, it's not them that's gonna get harmed from those statements.
It's a lack of appreciation for trade-offs.
Correct.
It's great in concept if you can have all of these things happen, but the thing that you're giving up in order to move, that ideal to the top is, as we're seeing, can be disastrous and dangerous. And I think that can be a part that's missed. And even if they have good intentions, it's looking, it's getting tunnel vision on it almost.
Yeah.
It's not taking the holistic approach, how everything plays together, and viewing it through that lens. It's looking at it. Okay, we want to remove nitrogen from the atmosphere or pollution in the waters, and if that's the only focus, you'll do anything you can to reduce that number. The consequences sometimes can be left unthought of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it also is to say that there's nothing wrong. I don't have a personal grievance with somebody that wants a exclusively organic grass-fed beef. We can go down the list of the terms, but it's when they begin to say that you can't do anything but that. That's where that becomes tricky. It's fine if that's how you, for whatever reason, want to eat your food, but when you start telling me that I can't or we can't eat the food or produce the food in any other manner, that's where it's not so much fun and games anymore.
Yeah, well, that's your earlier point, Jack. It can end up in policy. Mm-hmm. That's where it's really dangerous and you think it can't. You're like, well, what the hell? That'll never happen. Like, no way. But then, like you mentioned, Tommy, the Dutch farming crisis at the moment, and it's real. It happens, step by step. They implement this policy, even if it's against the majority of the public, assuming the public's even informed, but mostly they're not on these issues. Agriculture's just too complex and too foreign for them, but even if they and so now they instantiated in their law, the new economic or law of the country in the Netherlands, they're going to reduce nitrogen. In the EU, they're going to introduce a policy, I think it's called farm to fork, but they're, by their own data, their own analysis, they're going to do this by the year 2030 to reduce carbon footprint, in Europe. But it's so myopic, this war on CO2. What the hell? CO2 is the gas of life, but this meme they've been able to instantiate is to turn the gas of life, the gas that gives us life, that gives all plants life, with photosynthesis and the growth of plants, which is the base energy currency for everything on the planet, and they've turned that into being a toxic gas. So we shouldn't underestimate the power of Well, to be generous, unintended consequences. And to be less generous, to say, underestimate the power of malevolent, Trojan horses that can be used to dismantle a way of life and a system based on free market capitalism and human ingenuity that's lifted, humanity out of a Hobbesian nightmare.
At worst, it's unintended, or at best, it's unintended consequences. At worst, it's intended consequences.
Right,
yeah.
right. And so back to the EU, by 2030, they're going to convert 30% of their farmland in the whole EU. They're committed to this into what they call agroecological farming methods, which just means low-yield farming, pull out all the technology. And by their own analysis, they're going to produce like 36% less food. I mean, this is insanity. So now, where are they going to get their food from? Well, in Europe, they don't allow GMOs or gene editing, even though their scientific community agrees it's completely safe. Politically, they won't allow it. And so they would like to import all of their food, their agroecological organic food, from the nearest continent to them, which happens to be across the Mediterranean, called Africa. So it's very naughty, very pernicious that they would like to keep Africa dark, in the dark, in terms of farming techniques, so that they can, with all their wealth, they can import their organic food deficit. By their own policy in hands, they can import it from Africa and condemn them to hunger and misery and starvation.
Except for they would never use those terms.
No,
That's the other.
Right.
If you've paid attention to this at all, you also realize the power of words.
Yeah.
The term they're using is so it might produce outputs by 30% in the near term, but in the long term, we'll balance out our environmental concerns. But in the short term, we might experience food insecurity, is the term they're using.
Yeah.
And in
Right,
the real world, that means mass starvation, not in Europe, but across the strait in Africa, like you just said. And I think that's really important to distinguish that when you hear the terms like that, food insecurity, like what, that's putting it a little lightly when you say.
It should scare the hell out of you when you hear that.
Correct.
And your Trojan horse comment, it's being ushered in with their country or EU can save 40% on greenhouse gases, something like that.
So positive.
They're outsourcing that to other countries too, and it's not good.
It's very naughty, the whole thing, and but it's wrapped up with such great marketing. It's kind of a carrot and a stick. The carrot is we're going to usher in a utopian environmental heaven, and the stick is, well, we're going to tax you, and we're going to force you into this utopia, which is tremendous hubris.
Mm-hmm.
The arrogance underneath all of this is just staggering, and it's all top down too. It's like a planned committee, scientific, environmental panel is going to force it on people, and wherever we've seen this played out in the world, we should learn from history.
Mm-hmm.
In the 20th century was the bloodiest history in the world's history. We lost 100 million people to such promises of a utopian future that Marx kicked off, and Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot, and they implemented it. And Kim Jong-il is today still implementing it, and is in Venezuela. And so, the promise of utopia has been nothing but a road to hell, and misery. And to your point, Jack, the poor of the world, they have no shock absorber to such folly and hubris. if the cost of food or food security, food availability goes up, they can't buy anymore. They're stuck. And they're the ones who'll die, by the millions. The UN now, the world's facing a particular crisis that's sort of on everyone's TV and cell phone with the Ukraine war.
Mm-hmm.
But this is really a catalyst to something that's been building for the last couple of years. But now the UN and the FAO, they're predicting more than 500,000 people, maybe up to 800 million or 1 billion people. I mean, there's variations in their predictions of how many are going to be, starving, famine because of these crazy energy environmental problems and being crushed together with the Ukraine-Russian war,
Mm-hmm.
which is is it going to acutely affect the world's fertilizer and energy prices. But make no mistake, the table was set, is being set prior to the Ukraine-Russia war, and it's just becoming extremely acute now.
Yep, and it's back to your comment on striving for this utopia. I think that's something that, again, sounds great. Have that, and I think hopefully part of what this podcast can start to address is that having abundance ag and human prioritized focuses, that ultimately leads to the realist sense of what a utopia can be, and I think that kind of gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, just so we know what we mean when we're saying, abundance ag, but to name it specifically, what do we mean when we're talking about high yield? Use the term low yield agriculture, or what's the opposite if we're advocating for something? What is abundance ag? In specific terms, so that people that we want people that aren't in ag. That's the other piece. People in ag only talk to people in ag, so word never gets out. So
Yeah.
part of our goal is to talk to people that aren't in ag. So it might seem really basic to you guys, but what are these specific technologies or strategies or structures in this industry that lead to abundance ag?
Well, I think simply you kind of answered a portion of it there. It's the embracing of the available technologies that
Like
lead
what?
to. So if we're talking on the beef or livestock side, there's there are growth promoting technologies that are completely safe and may help the animal grow faster and more efficient and grow larger. And with all of those things comes less environmental footprint and more food for the world. And so embracing things that make systems more efficient overall leads to more abundance, and at the same time lifts up the environmental baseline for what or the footprint is improved because of that. So that would be one simple-ish example. Would be that we want to grow animals more efficiently using the available technologies that are proven time and time again to be safe and and efficient or efficacious.
Sure. So technology such as, you're talking about hormone implants, growth promotants, is that?
Yep.
In layman terms?
Yeah. So hormone implant would be one. Another one would be the use of these ionophores, which modify bacteria to make a more, they digest the nutrients more efficiently, capture more energy from the diet, and allow for better growth. Another one would be beta agonists, beta adrenergic agonists, and so those they would promote lean deposition in place of fat, and so there's more tissue being laid down, and that also leads to more efficient growth and a larger carcass at the end of the day. So that would be a couple.
This is obviously your. We could go into. Many of the podcasts will be more specific on topics such as this, I predict. And if you're listening and wondering why he knows, speaking in these kind of specific terms, you might have mentioned in passing, but your PhD in ruminant nutrition. So this is, on a very, very scientific level and objective level, you have an exceeding competence in this area. So I think to back up and push back against some of these things that when the public just hears growth promotants, but they don't actually understand it, to have the chance to break it out, because it is a big conversation. So on the animal side, that's okay. So we might hear topics like that going forward. How about on the, and that's a good segue, I guess, into kind of where your expertise is. And then Dad, over there, your background in international ag and kind of what we've talked about thus far and big picture, feeding the world. But in specific terms to, as we talk about those feeding the world and abundance ag, what are some topics that come to mind that you think we would likely tackle in this podcast?
I think top of the list would be, because of the biggest bang for the buck, is gene editing.
Okay.
Or genetic engineering. People have heard GMO, genetically modified organisms, which is a very bad terminology, because everything's a GMO actually. Like, it's not useful language. But so genetic engineering is much more precise, and that's and then there's modern breeding techniques is another term, because we've been tinkering. We're the greatest tinkerers that ever inhabited this planet. Humans, we are the greatest adapters of our environment, and so we've been tinkering with plants and animals ever since we could get literally our hands on them, and so I think the genetic engineering is somewhere we should explore, because there's, within any population, doesn't matter whether it's in a plant or with insects or with animals, the variation across a population is huge, and this is just like magnificent for scientists that are working in this area, and magnificent for farmers, because with such huge variation, you have your mean, your average performance or average yield of crops, like rice as example in Thailand. It might be a good example, but there will be some rice cultivars that will do 2 or 3 times as much in terms of growth and disease resistance than the average. It's the same in corn and in wheat. It's the same in cattle and in chickens. And so we have this in genetic engineering with the new techniques like we're using with CRISPR, which would be fun to talk about. But that's that's gene editing within a species. It means we can reach way over here on the right side of this distribution curve and pick out those outliers that are just waiting to be picked. That is the lowest fruit of the lowest fruit, and then we plug them into their cohorts, their brothers and sisters, and boom, we got 30% increase right now in yield and growth or in disease resistance. And so this is the greatest opportunity actually to allow us to get more from less. Like, there's a great book by Andrew McAfee. Hopefully we'll talk about different books in our podcast, but the theme of that is more for less, which is really is a hallmark of human ingenuity. We're always developing, tinkering, and the end result is we can get more out of less, which is a wondrous phenomenon. Another area would be in our use of chemistry. Our understanding of manipulating chemistry and creating compounds that can help prevent disease, and with less, we're using micro amounts of as example, insecticides and pesticides, and we can fine tune with what they call precision ag. Very, very exciting area, using AI. Computer intelligence, using drones, using all sorts of technology. And I think abundance agriculture to me means like anything we can get our hands on and to use safely, with a commitment to to, the animals and the environment that they will also benefit, that should be, liberated and fostered and encouraged for farmers of the world to adopt. And the end result of that will be human flourishing,
Yeah.
And that's what we want. We want humans, before we even sat down, I like that we chatted about what would be the central tenet, and our central tenet would be human-centric, that what we can advocate for would be a human flourishing viewpoint. And agriculture, literally, excuse the pun, feeds right into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that this is the first episode, so we got to come up with episode ideas. So we're kind of brainstorming here, but I think something that would be cool is, I work with Better Fed Beef. We all do. That's our family business and a family business through and through, all the way to the families raising the cattle. But one thing that I find, kind of being an outsider to ag in some respect, is the way that ideas and words and phrases catch on, and the fact that people don't have the interest or capacity to look beyond just the words. So I think a cool episode would be or even portion of an episode would be to tackle some of these buzzwords that are out there, like factory farms, and unpack that and explain that, okay, yeah, so this definition, whatever this definition is of a factory farm, the reality is it's a family that has successfully reinvested in their farm for 5 generations and now is operating on a large scale, and they're incorporated like every other family business. And beyond that, that's one that comes to mind. But unpacking like in beef, you hear so much, at least we do, about grass-fed, grass-finished. But there's no real definition around that, and there's no real agreement on what constitutes that. Or I would argue, many of the people wanting it or asking about it don't quite even know what they're asking for or why they're asking for it. But again, this idea, this phrase that's caught on like a wildfire, and ultimately they're telling good stories in these areas, and I'd like to see if we can tell a little bit better story.
Yeah, it would be a great podcast idea, because I think a lot of people, everyone, they've heard the terms factory farming or grass-fed, and if they don't know anything about it, they still know the connotation that's implied with it. Yes. And that's jumping to, they're winning the definition game.
Yes.
And that's why definitions in general are not something to be toyed with. And if we want to control the perception of how this industry or the ag community in general operates, it's changing that narrative a little bit. And so unpacking why factory farming, almost universally that sounds negative. But the outcomes of factory farming, I don't think that's something we need to, we don't want to shy away from it. We'd maybe like to refer to it as something else, but the intentions of factory farming are pure, and quite advanced, and lead to the abundance egg.
Yeah.
And so I think that's that is something we definitely need to tackle, and maybe you want to jump in on this too, but another topic kind of similar would be, an example is that the definition of milk is kind of lost. That's already one that the industry has chalked up as, that's gone kind of sideways. There's almond milk and all these different types of milk, they get to call them milk, but that one's kind of, the page is turned. And so meat is the next one on the table. And so learning from history, like you had mentioned, that's pretty important lesson, and that's pretty recent history, was the milk battle, and now it's the meat one. And I think that could be kind of fun too, because you think meat is so simple and everyone knows what meat is. Turns out it's pretty damn complex when it gets down to it, if we let this get too far away.
Correct. It's only a couple a generation maybe before the mind share is shifted, and what's once accepted as obviously, this isn't meat, it's made of whatever the hell not meat is made of. The fact that almonds, what's the like the fact that that's become just accepted in
Silk.
in the milk department or the dairy department of your groceries.
Yeah, smart marketing by the
Yeah.
almond guys.
No, yeah, you didn't know that you could milk an almond until a couple of years ago.
It's the,
How many tits on an almond?
so the meet the parents. Show me the tits on an almond, Greg. So yeah,
Exactly.
they were tapping into it, but
Yeah. Well, you can lose the language, you lose the communication, you lose the battle.
yeah,
So
People have-
language matters. It's the same with organic. It got to be this virtuous thing, and by inference, they were able to say, well, anything that's not organic is bad.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a robbery. They pulled off a heist of the language because there is no food that's inorganic. All food is organic. Every form of life that contains carbon, which all life forms do, is by definition organic.
Mm-hmm.
But they very clever. They stole the language and manipulated it. And same factory farming. It evokes such negatives. Harsh, cold, maybe clinical, non-caring, and nothing could be further from the truth. The farms of consequence, the farms that are producing abundant food, I would contend they care as much, if not more, for their animals. They're the most successful, to your point, Jack. They've been at it 4, 5, 6 generations. Even just by the evolutionary pressure, they've been able to survive because they are better and better and better than the average. Because the average doesn't win. The average goes away over time. So they represent the best of the best. And it's competitive out there. They care for their animals. They care for their environment. They care for their employees. They care. Not all do. Some are obviously are obviously not up to it, and
It's the same as anything, though, right?
Same in anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in general, they're remarkable in their approach, in their professionalism, and
And you're right. If they don't check every one of those boxes, they're not going to stick around.
Right.
And, some of those boxes are economic driven, but that stems from animals need to be treated well, and the people that are handling the animals need to be treated well. And so it's not like it's made out to be. It's an interesting thing anyways that I'm sure we're going to get into more. But
yeah.
So-
and reclaim the language around it would be important.
yeah. The this whole concept or idea of or reality that people have short attention spans, and how do we these sound bites are so captivating, and if you're not going to look into it any further, it's understandable that the average person that has no further knowledge of these farms of consequence, when they hear the term factory farm, why wouldn't, in their mind, why wouldn't they think of that as something bad? If that's all they're going to think about it. And I think the challenge for us is that the solutions are never, the real answers are never actually that simple. And so while they're getting away with this, not real nuanced, complex understanding or description of what's happening, the challenge then is to how do you convey the reality that isn't simple and doesn't have those pleasant, utopian, sunny grass fields and smiling cows kind of idea behind it. How do you convey that in a way that's interesting and convincing? And we're going to try to tackle it, and it's going to be a challenge, but we'll do our best.
It's so easy. You can say organic farming is better for the environment and be done with it.
Yeah.
To refute it, you need to take hours.
Correct.
That's why the game is so hard to play.
Exactly. And data isn't, even you could have all the data in the world, which maybe we'll get into that later, if for those that really do, but it doesn't matter in the end if it's data versus a feeling or an emotion, unless you really, really are going to dig in and understand the data, which is a challenge in its own right. In these areas where people aren't like if I were to look at, well, I did. Tommy used to give me some of his PhD like course materials just kind of for fun, and I had zero clue what's going on in there. And so there's a barrier there too, that to really understand it, you also have to really understand so many things prior to understanding the actual issue that's being debated.
And naturally, people that like data, you can never have enough. It's never done. And so
No.
that's also part of it too, is diving into it. It can take so long to accumulate what you think is, the final stamp, and it still might not be settled, but it just takes more effort to unpack these really quick headlines that grab people's attention. And
Well, the power of the negative is a real phenomenon. The old parable of the, bowl of cockroaches and a cherry. I don't
know this one.
Yeah, you can take a bowl of cherries or strawberries and you introduce a cockroach to it, and no one will eat any strawberries out of that whole bowl or cherries, right? They're done. But the converse is if you take a bowl of cockroaches and introduce one nice strawberry to it, it's still revolting. I mean, you're over-revolted. The power of the negative is so strong compared to the positive. And so all of these memes, play on that. People's natural fear, we're programmed to be, you hear the rustling in the grass, you should think lion, not rabbit. And they prey on this psychologically, And so the challenge to try and tell a bigger story, a more nuanced story against the fear mongering. I mean, Jack, before you mentioned like Frankenstein food and the negative marketing is very powerful. That's the point. Push back against it. We should take some encouragement from Joe Rogan. He talks complex things for 3 hours, and granted, he has very interesting subject matter, not just fairly interesting, but there is I think we should have hope. There's more and more people out there that want to understand more, and so we have to try and in all humbleness reach people that do want to know more, and we need to tell better stories is the antidote, and I think the best story to be told should, at the heart of it, should be around human flourishing. Our greatest responsibility on this planet is to each other, to people. And if we can look after people first, and the most fundamental of things that people need is food, affordable food, If we can look after people in terms of affordable, nutritious, safe food, then so many good things will flow after that. And the next part of the story is, by the way, we can also look after the environment at the same time. And at the same time, we can turn back millions and millions of acres of land to nature and recreation. And at the same time, we can clean up all the waters and the lakes. And at the same time, we can regreen the earth, reforest the earth, the deserts even.
And lift people out of poverty.
And we can lift them out of poverty and have people's, health and life expectancy and ability to flourish. It's all within our grasp, but the bedrock of it is farming, and producing abundant food at affordable prices, and if we can tell that story, that's something that people can maybe grab onto and help advocate for.
Sounds like a utopia.
Yeah, it does. One thing I'm again, this is our first episode. We don't have a framework, but one thing I think could be kind of nice is to. There's a lot of challenges we're talking about here, but I even if they're small things, what are some areas that you see some positive, moving in the right direction, in simple ways? And I'll answer the question first. One way that I am seeing, for all the issues that on social media, especially in this, whether it's the vegan community or the all the things we're talking about, I'm starting to see more and more farm families or farmers developing followings on social media, using that tool to showcase a really unfiltered and honest look at what goes on these farms. There's many of them out there now that have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers, and I think that's moving in the right direction, and more people doing that would be a really great thing. It doesn't really tackle any of these policy or these scientific questions, but I think it starts to expose people to the other perspective and get a glimpse behind the curtain into these farms.
It shows it's a great example. It shows there is a desire, at least for some people out there, to, everyone's more conscientious about where their food comes from today. And these people are opening their door and giving that glimpse in. And I think the authentic, true insight it's being valued. That's why their followings grow. I've seen some of these guys too.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool what they do. And it's raw, it's a little bit uncut, and it's very real. And it's definitely a positive, and probably ties in with now that we can actually get product that to people directly too. And so there's new marketing that's coming with that. And if people do want to source their food directly from a place of their liking, that's more and more likely to happen now too, and more approachable to happen.
How about that's my marketing / non-ag answer. How about on the in some of your areas, to the degree that we have areas, where do you see there's got to be some positive, that's occurring amongst all
last week, I think Kenya.
Okay.
The Kenyan government agreed to allow GMOs, gene-edited crops, to be grown in Kenya. That's huge.
There we go.
Yeah, because we need Africa's made of, I think, 54 nations, and the people there are desperate. The farmers there are desperate for technology to help them, because they're the most fragile in the world too. I mean, they got to fight bloody locust plagues, and they got to fight, wheat rust and stem rust, and they got every plague and pestilence that's, and it's dry there, And so it's tough part of the world. 1.2 billion people there, soon to double, and in maybe like in 80 years' time. Like, did you know Nigeria will be the third largest populated country in the world here, like in the next 30 years?
Only because you told me.
Yeah. Well, India is number one. China's number two, thanks to their one-child policy, which is going to eat them right in the ass pretty soon. And then Nigeria will be number 3 most populated in the world. Like, it's hard to believe. 8 out of 10 new people to be born into the world will be in Africa or in Asia. So this is where it's all going to happen. So Kenya, making the decision to push back against the environmental NGO political lobbies and go for it. Another bright spot is China. Like, for all China's failings and horrors, one thing is they're desperate to keep food security. They learned from Mao, if they're going to keep hold of this thing, they got to feed people. And that's why China's buying up, millions of acres in Africa, Sudan, and all over the place, even buying land in Australia, New Zealand, and in the U.S. too. Food security. They leased, I don't know how many, let's just say 1 million acres in Eastern Europe too. So China's dead serious, but what I wanted to say is China is in a race with the U.S. on CRISPR technology. They have the second most patents, but it's like neck and neck. And they have the first. They own the most patents for food-related CRISPR technology. So they're getting all in on genetic engineering for their food. So this is also really powerful, because a lot of the nations of the world will look to them and follow, as well. And so that's very positive, I think, as well. Mm-hmm.
One kind of localized example of some progress is that you can drive around the U.S. and it's in a pretty severe drought, but crops are still growing, and there's some reports that they may be less than last year or things like that, but it's not that long ago where a drought like this would have resulted in no crops for a lot of these places, and so seeing the progress on these drought tolerant genetically engineered crops, selective breeding crops and things like that, that's a pretty real example that you can just step outside and go for a drive and see.
It's a great one. That's our good friend Mr. Seth Tusher. I've heard him. He's an agronomist in South Dakota, and I've heard him, as we all have, talk about this. The customers and peers of his that have been farming that land for their grandparents, and saying that this amount of rain that we're having, and we're having pretty good harvests, there wouldn't be anything to harvest in their lifetime, and they had harvests like that, and so that's a really in one generation the change that's been ushered through. So that's
incredible.
That's a massive positive.
Then golden rice was just approved in the Philippines after about 20 years. This is bio-fortified rice where they've added beta-carotene, which plagues like 250 million children in the developing world suffer from blindness. And I don't know how many of them die, but there's a huge percentage of mortality from vitamin A deficiency. And but it's a tremendous success that it finally got approved. They can insert beta-carotene gene into rice, which is white. Of course, rice is white. And now it's golden. It's yellow. It gets the carotene like from carrots. It's a pigment and a precursor to vitamin A. So now with every meal of rice, they can get some vitamin A nutrition and prevent blindness, and rice is the staple food. And so now, this is something that the poor of the world, can directly benefit from, and it's a proof of concept. And to finally get it through, Greenpeace has been fighting against it for 20 years. They have the death of hundreds of thousands of children on their hands from their unconscionable lobbying to they should have stuck to saving whales, but they got bored with whales apparently, and then they decided to make their life's mission to
stop golden rice.
To stop golden rice and the advance of humanity. They've become an anti-human organization, and I'm a great fan of one of the founders, Patrick Moore. He's a tremendous scientist and individual who left there because of this obscene hijacking of their mission. So, but anyway, the positive is the Philippines approved it, and many others will follow. Bangladesh last year approved the use of GMO for one of their food staple crops too. So there's some bright spots for sure.
Wonderful. That's great.
It could be kind of a fun thing to do each podcast is to highlight a new positive thing that's going on. In general, that's what we're kind of setting out to do anyways, but come with specific examples of like you said, one of your examples was earlier this week. And so if we're doing this on there might be new things that come up between each podcast that we could highlight that might be a cool thing to do.
And I think also, if you're listening, if you have positive things, or if you have topics that, as this goes on and hopefully somebody listens, let us know. Also what we have things we want to talk about. But of course there's other things out there that maybe we hadn't considered or are more likely to get to the top of the list if we hear people, on us to tackle, I don't know, playing rugby for Marist or something like that. I don't know. I don't know how you're going to get a hold of us. We should have made an email, something, but that's your human ingenuity. Find a way to get a hold of us and give us your questions.
They'll track us down.
Yeah.
They'll track you boys down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, fellas.
Just any
Number one down.
Fun. Looking forward to
Super fun.
to chatting more and kicking this thing around. You know, it's like got to do something that's that maybe can make a difference. You know, like even a small, but it's worth trying. So
absolutely.
thanks.
Thank you.
Good on ya.
Cue
Good
the
work, guys.
exit music.
Thanks.